Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from today. Hello, welcome to this LinkedIn Live session. My name is Laura Belmain. I'm joined today by the amazing Jessie Kriss, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome you to our Fight Club. Security versus compliance style. Right, let's just welcome our wonderful guest Jessie to the stage with me. Let's do this. Hi, Jessie. How you doing?
Hey, Laura. Great. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. You're joining me from a beautiful sunny day. It's 9 a.m. It's Friday. What more could I want? For those of you still in the past, it is going to be a beautiful day. Um, so, just to introduce myself for those who are joining in for the first time, my name's Laura Belmain. I am an application security specialist and general cat herder, and I love helping very young or very small, fast-moving software teams build amazing things securely. And it's my absolute delight today to be joined by Jessie Kriss. So, Jessie, introduce yourself. Why are you awesome?
Well, I'll keep this short. I'm Jesse Kriss. I run a company called Monorail Technology. It's a solo security consultancy, and I've done a whole bunch of things in the past that have kind of pointed in this way and that. So my background is actually in software design and development, human-computer interaction, user-centered design, and then got into security at Netflix, then built and led the security program at a company called Watershed here in San Francisco, and now running my own independent shop, also helping small companies do things securely with little stress as possible and just try to keep things on board and save everybody time and money.
Amazing. Look, what I love about this is, so audience at home, to give you a bit of background on this, I met Jessie a wee while ago, and we definitely clicked as very like-minded security nerds, despite the fact he said Netflix in the middle of that bio there, which we're all going to, feel slightly inadequate for not working for giant companies. But he shares the same mission as me, and the idea that it actually doesn't matter how big your organization is or what stage you're at, or whether somebody's heard of your company or not. Security is a really essential part of what we do. So it's my delight to have Jessie here today. We're going to get stuck into the true, mother of all arguments that happen within the security space, which is the battle between security and compliance. Now, we are going to have an old school debate here today, but before we do that, let's cover a little bit of groundwork. So, Jessie, let's get into some of the questions, because the folks at home want to learn something today, hopefully, and not just be entertained. So what do you think about the difference between security and compliance? For you, are they the same thing, or are they really different things? So what's your 5 cents?
Yeah, I think there's actually quite a lot of overlap. I know some people say that they're fully distinct. To me, I think of security as the work that we do to reduce risk, to address threats. And compliance is largely around, are you actually doing these things? But the difference is that these things are decided by somebody else. They might be decided by an audit framework or, something like that. And so to me, the compliance side, it does have a lot of overlap, but I think of it primarily as security assurance.
I think, for looking at my background and my history, for me, compliance, I used to have a really difficult relationship with compliance. Like, full disclosure, audience, I had very strong feelings about how terrible audit was. And I was an auditor for a while. So there was conflict. But actually, as I've gotten older and mellowed a bit, I'm starting to realize that they're not distinct. Compliance is what happens when you need to communicate some explicit requirements in a space that is very complicated and very diverse. Because what was happening is, we were saying, hey, we should all do security. And we're all like, yes, absolutely. But that's like saying, I'm going to go on a trip to Europe. That's vast. And there's many options for what you're going to go and do while you're there. So compliance is always going to be backwards looking, because it's trying to put a lens on top of that and say, okay, all right, well, let's agree then that this is what we're going to say is security. This is going to be the explicit set of things we do. There's many challenges with that, and we'll come to that. But I've mellowed from my compliance is just theater, which I genuinely have said on stage a few times. Sorry, compliance people. But to more now, it's a necessary evil, if you wish, in a very complex space.
Mm-hmm.
So, is compliance then, if we agree on that bit, is it a useful nudge towards something more useful? Or what role does it play for most of the organizations you work for?
Yeah, so I think it's really different depending on the size of the company and the industry they're in. So if you think of a young software company that heard they need a SOC 2 report, there are probably things that are good practices that they aren't doing yet that will nudge them towards, right? It is a good thing to offboard people relatively quickly, right? It is a good idea to have written policies for kind of core security operations functions, right?
Yeah.
So it's certainly at that stage, I think it actually is a really helpful way to kind of bootstrap a program. And people otherwise might be thinking of security as purely AppSec, right? And a lot of engineering-led companies can have that idea by default, and then you start looking at enterprise security risks and things like that. Like, oh yeah, we never even thought about that, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
in
and then
those
they go
cases,
slightly
absolutely,
green pale.
yeah.
Yeah. So in those cases, I think that that's a really interesting group of organizations as well, right? If you are in a fast moving, engineering led organization and that's your culture, the second as a security person, we turn around and say, hey, we're going to need some sort of policy on this. Like, I feel like 20 years of trauma comes to the surface all at once. And everyone gets these like images of 800-page PDF documents and, 6-week long compliance courses. But I don't think it really has to be like that. I think that perhaps just because we've seen compliance done with very formalized, slow-moving, paper-based systems, it really doesn't need to be that way. And I think our engineering team, if you let them, can often use that compliance reason as a lever to then do some really cool tech-enabled security work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that compliance and security both have in common is that they've caused people a lot of trauma and pain in the past. And so much of the work we do is kind of saying it doesn't have to be that way. We can solve this in a reasonable way. And I think compliance and security have, the way it's been practiced at many companies has really taught people that it's a waste of time.
Yeah. Look, I'm
sad.
going to go off the official list, Jesse, tell me off here, but that's fine. You'll be
Do
fine.
it. Go off road.
Yeah, let's go off road. So what do you think caused that? Why do you think historically it was so painful and traumatic? And what's enabling us to be better at this? What's making this next generation of security actually a little bit more human and, approachable?
Oh, let's see. You want to hear what I really think about this one?
Of course I do. 100%. Go for it. Look, there's only like random people on the internet listening. What could go wrong?
Yeah, that's right. My view on this is that the kind of old school of security, the security mentality, was very much, it was somewhere in the combination between we're the cops and we're the ones with the keys and control to everything. And some of those teams really took the thing that was most exciting for them about their work was the fact that they had power over other people. Right. And that's, I think everyone sort of had hopefully not everyone. Many people have probably had the kind of, nightmare interaction with security or IT where it really is about the power differential.
Yeah.
And I think part of what's different now, expectations have changed in, the workplace a bit here. We've got a different idea of what is and isn't acceptable behavior. I think people are not willing to put up with some of those power dynamics anymore.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the positive side. Actually, the thing that brought me to Netflix in the first place is they had some really strong tenets in the company culture around basically treating people like adults and giving people free rein to do the work they thought was important in the way that they wanted. And the pitch that brought me in was, we want our security tools to embody that as well. And to me, I was like, whoa, what? that's what seemed like such an advanced idea, that the actual way the tools are designed and the way those processes are implemented are just as much a part of corporate culture as how you do project planning, or, whether you need permission from your boss's boss to spend $100.
Yeah, and I think, we look at like the cases like Netflix, and it always feels kind of like there's massive, oh my goodness, of course they can do it, they're Netflix. But if I think back to, John Allspaw and the early days of when Etsy was at the height of their engineering culture work, and I remember walking into their office in Brooklyn, which felt like a world away for me, and listening to them talk about blamelessness and how security was a collaborative effort, and that every part of the business was measured and security was measured too. And it was that moment for me where I realized this wasn't that security was separate. Security was part of what they were as an engineering organization. And
Hmm.
therefore, the expectations on the security team were the same as the expectations on the engineering teams. And, that was 10 years ago now. But when we see how far as an industry we've come now, I'm actually really pleased to see that, because, we could probably do an entire session on the reasons why, there can be miscommunications between those teams. But I think
Hmm.
in many cases that we've gotten a long way past that. But speaking of things that we probably want to get past, because, why not? What do you say to people who are like, compliance is just a tick box. I'm just going to check the box, get it done, and then forget it ever exists?
Yeah. I would say saying that to compliance about compliance overall is problematic. I'll say that here and there, it is okay, I believe, to do the thing that an audit framework or a customer is saying, you just really need to do this.
Hmm.
Sometimes it is out of date, sometimes it doesn't really apply. But depending on how much burden that is, sometimes it's okay to check the box.
Mm.
But I would say, if you zoom out a little bit, my question is, if you're going to do some work anyway, why don't you
Yeah.
do work that's useful, right? Why don't you do work that isn't wasting people's time,
Yeah.
right? Because again, even if you're asking someone to do a small thing that truly doesn't make sense, you're teaching them to not trust you as a steward of their time, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to make that next thing harder. So I'd much prefer to look at it and say, hey, is there a version of this that is maybe 10% more effort or
Mm.
10% more money even,
Yeah.
that actually does something valuable for us?
Yeah.
Because this is one of the things, if you're looking at security as a totally separate thing from compliance, well, maybe you're checking the box on compliance and then you're doing related work in security. Whereas if you actually solve those things together, you may be spending less time, less money, and have a far less frustrated
Yeah.
workforce.
I love a phrase that I'm going to pull out one of your phrases and just sort of like give it a little bit of limelight there. You are the stewards of their time. I love that. I love the idea that, part of what we have to do as security and compliance professionals is show respect. When we ask someone to do something, we are saying, we need you to do extra things. We're going to
Yeah.
take some of your time to do this, and some of your resources, and some of your effort. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The power that is in respecting someone's time and only asking for what is needed to be done, or allowing it to be as useful as possible, massively underrated.
Hmm.
Okay, well, so you've got your motivation in this. You love what you're doing. What do you say to people, or let me reframe that, in fact. When people say they actually care about compliance, what do they actually mean?
People in this case being like employees at a company that is
Yeah,
are
well, let's
doing
break it
that,
down.
or
What groups?
yeah.
So, okay, if you're going to say, you've got a CTO, or an exec team, an engineering-led organization, and they say, yeah, we care about compliance. What does that actually
Hmm.
mean normally?
Yeah, I think of that in two main flavors. One is that, maybe a company cares about compliance because it is one of the ways they're signaling to their customers, hey, we're
Mm,
doing the right things, we're serious about this, right? And as you said, a lot of compliance really is about how do you decide on, how do you make the good practices legible to all of these other organizations,
yeah,
right? If I'm a software company, my enterprise customers want some assurance that I'm doing things reasonably well in the
yeah,
security domain, and being able to telegraph that customer trust ahead of time both for prospective clients and or customers and current. That's a huge deal. And then the other flavor that I think of is in really like regulated industries where it's not optional. It's not just a signal of trust or competence. It's something that, you must follow these regulations or else there are consequences that aren't just about customer trust. It might be fines. It might be, losing the ability to do business in certain cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can all probably, identify which industries those are likely to be, the medical space, financial,
Yeah.
those regulated industries where regulation is that step above compliance. It's not just about communication there. It's about a broader understanding and expectation about safety.
Yeah.
So the part that you've kind of mentioned there, I think is interesting, is we spend a lot of time in especially in these early stage high growth companies talking about how we grow more and how we go faster. And what you're saying really then is that security is a tool for growth.
Yeah.
It is a way to, if your new customers are bigger than you and they're going to send you their, security love letter in the form of a security questionnaire, and they can be like, yeah, hey, new friend, can you show me how, we can trust you? Because it's a big deal getting into a relationship with someone, let alone, a security relationship. That's like the worst kind. So it's helping to make that process smoother. And so hopefully, theoretically then, providing you've got product market fit and all of those things, then you get to grow more. Do you see
Yeah.
that working out?
Absolutely. I mean, this was completely my experience at Watershed. Netflix had a very different market, obviously a consumer product.
Yeah.
And moving into Watershed, I realized very quickly, oh, I need to be best friends with the sales team. That's
Yeah.
our first contact here. And
Mm.
part of it is, yes, doing the work to be at the right bar, to have the right types of materials to be able to send these companies. But I realized also that the sooner a prospective customer knows how your product really fits in and how it should be treated in terms of risk level and integration, the smoother it's going to be. So the hardest cases is when you're talking to some, Fortune 500 company and they don't know how your product works with their systems and they just kind of throw everything at you. You
Yeah.
get their longest questionnaire, you've got all the scariest questions. You're like, how did this
Mm-hmm.
happen? But if you can
Yeah.
scope that early on, it helps tremendously.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that we underestimate when we're selling upwards, if you will, to these larger organizations. I've spoken to very large US banks, like the type of bank you will see in every city on every high street. And I sat down with their security team and I said, look, okay, what do you look for? When you're buying a product, because assuming that everyone wants to sell to the biggest banks in America, like, what do you look for? And they're like, oh yeah, oh, my goodness. In all honesty, most companies don't have a big enough boat to look after us. Because they have to bring the full scope of their security questionnaires to bear, because we're not talking about, well, you're going to have a few hundred users. You're looking at tens of thousands of users. You're not looking at a small data set. You're looking at a very sensitive, very complex data set. And so for them, it wasn't just a nice to have tick in the process for sales. It was actually a first class citizen. It was one of the first conversations they have, to the point where they actually now have incubator programs within these huge banks that help prepare young companies to sell to banks. Because otherwise, you can't, it's very difficult to get there on your own.
Yeah.
On average, an organization will wait till there are about 150 people to hire their first security person. And when you think about how many organizations are out there doing amazing things that have nowhere near 150 people, you start to realize that how big a gap there is between that big end of where you might want to sell to where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, feelings and opinions times before we get into a bit of a debate to sort of, carry this through to its logical finale. What are the risks, in your view, of making security or compliance overly cumbersome, making it super hard to do or heavy?
Yeah. There's so many. The first, I think, is that you lose trust within an organization. If you're on a security or compliance team that is pushing work that doesn't make sense, that's obviously inefficient, people just stop trusting you, which makes that next initiative that much harder. Or especially in the case of security, you might not hear about things that you need to be hearing about.
Mm.
Right? It's so important to know, oh, there's a new service launching, or there's a new type of integration, right? A lot of security work really is kind of that ear to the ground. What's happening here, and how can we help do it in a good way, so that we aren't playing recovery and cleanup later,
Mm.
right? I'd say that's probably the biggest one. And maybe with one of the less obvious ones is that stuff like this really changes how it feels to work at a company, I think.
Yeah.
And so
Could
when
you go into
people
that a
leave,
bit more?
yeah, it's a little bit kind of connecting to that idea with Netflix of saying the tools and processes are part of company culture.
Mm.
So especially this is really interesting with startups, I think, because people join startups because they want to be part of something small and scrappy, and they want to be able to move fast and have all this
Hmm.
influence. And then you start adding security controls and compliance and process. And there's a natural amount of people leaving as a company grows, because it's simply not the kind of place they want to be.
Hmm.
But I think burdensome or confusing, or you know processes that aren't kind of speaking people's language and working with them, that adds to the like malaise of bureaucracy that drives
Mm.
people out as a company grows,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes just one of the things on the list. It might be that plus, oh, now I need permission to buy software, plus whatever, right? But these things kind of add up, and given that some of them are actually necessary as the company grows, you those unnecessary ones are like especially poisonous. I think
Mm.
contribute to people just being unhappy and deciding they want to be somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a little movement in the quite a big movement now in the software engineering community of measuring and articulating toil. So
Mhm.
tasks that you have to do which don't appear to directly contribute to what you actually are supposed to be doing in your day. And I think one of the most important things that we can do in the security space, whether it's because of compliance or for pure security benefits, is making sure we don't end up in that toil bucket, or that
Yeah.
we're, if we are already automatically categorized as something that's going to be a painful and unnecessary experience, it's going to be really hard for us to get that buy-in and get it to stick long term.
Mhm.
So, what does a security let's try it again. What does a security first culture look like, Jesse?
I think it starts with the realization that security is really a pillar of so many businesses, and that it really is everybody's responsibility to represent that. Like a lot of
Mm.
people say that security is everybody's job, and that can very quickly get misinterpreted as
As it's nobody's
everybody
job.
needs it's nobody's job, or like everybody needs to be an expert, which I also don't think is
Yeah.
true. But just this understanding that security really is an underpinning of a company's success,
Yeah.
from that proactive, sales oriented, we've got our stuff together, we know what we're doing, we're a real company, you should trust us with your data, all the
We're
way
growing up
through
now.
to, yeah, right, which startups are often trying to kind of fake it before they make it on that front. um, all the way through to bad things do happen, they happen to companies that seem like they were really prepared,
Yeah.
and being able to respond to that in a way that is both a reasonable way to respond. You can actually build trust in incident response, even with
Yeah.
customers. They really appreciate it when something is handled well and you're clear in communication.
Mm.
And customer trust is just such a huge deal through the entire pipeline. And if you get that wrong, it will sink your company. And hopefully that's not just you know you got unlucky and some really nasty security incident happens, but it shows up throughout the entire process.
Mm.
So I think that's the number one thing is people realizing, oh yeah, this is really a part of what we do. This
Yeah.
isn't some ancillary function, the people who sit over there, right? That's thing one.
Yeah.
And then from there, I think a collaborative working relationship with the security and compliance teams. Your legal's the same way, right? Once you're really part of the team, then you can say, here's where our expertise meets. This is when you should ask me a
Mm.
question. This is when I should ask you a question.
Yeah.
And then to your point earlier of having it really be integrated, whether it's with engineering or other areas of the company, just having it really be that something that is in the loop, and it truly is part of the ecosystem of the business.
Yeah. Does that differ from an organization that's compliance first? Would that look different?
I think it can look different, right? You can imagine the scenario where you have kind of internal audit going around after the fact and following up on everything and asking the questions and writing the report,
Yeah.
right? There's compliance in particular can have that sort of insider outsider thing of we're not here to touch anything, right? We're here to make sure that everything's being done correctly. As
Yeah.
and what's the phrase I'm looking for? I'm blanking on it now. But yeah, almost like an outside party. Right.
Yeah, all good. And it's much easier, right? Like I've been an auditor, I've been a pen tester. It's kind of a cheap trick. You walk in, someone's go, oh, look, you missed a bit. And you write a nice report and then you walk away. It's easy because you don't have to fix anything. I know disrespect intended to my former audit brethren, but yeah, it's much easier to find problems with what people are doing than it is to build a program of your own. And
absolutely,
that's why for me, while this is security versus compliance, I will always naturally favor the security sort of driven approach where compliance just comes along for the ride.
Yeah, and I think even if you do have compliance and security fairly separate, there's still a flavor of more collaborative, more integrated compliance that's really taking into account, okay, what am I asking of people in this organization as a compliance team? How can I make that easier, right? How can I make it easier to provide evidence? How can I turn these into more like continuous assurance systems and less of here's the team that goes around with the microscope every 6 months and asks hard questions?
Yeah. Look, I'm fundamentally very lazy, Jesse, in almost everything I do.
All good software engineers, right?
Exactly. And so like for me, this is just natural. What you're saying is don't just do this as a one-off with somebody manually having to check it. You're an engineer. It's literally what you're wired to do. Find a way to understand the rules you've got to follow and then make the robots do it for you. And then you can just go and have a cup of coffee and then we all win.
Success.
So let's bring this together with like a little very short kind of scenario debate, if you will. Let's pretend we'll pick a company completely at random. Obviously not all that at random because, it would be very, very hard. And let's talk about which is going to win, which is going to be more important to us, security or compliance, and what's the approach we're going to take. Now, I'm going to make you pick a team. So it's a debate. You've got to pick one side or the other. Who would you like to be, Jesse?
Oh, I'll pick security. I'll make it easy on myself.
Oh, that's not fair. I don't think we can be friends anymore. Okay. All right. Well, I'll go compliance. And let's talk about two different organizations. We'll do one and then the other. So the first one is going to be just a B2B SaaS. Let's just imagine they've, it's a bit hype now. They've created a new AI agent that's going to do something amazing for your, sales life cycle or something. So non-regulated industry.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is going to win, security or compliance? Which one do you think we need to do first and why?
I think we need to do security first here because especially for a new company, getting some of the basics in place, it's so much easier to do with a smaller company. And if you're an AI company now, you're going to want to brag about how good your security is even before you're done with your SOC 2.
Yeah. So it's really hard being on this side of the debate, so bear with me. I'm going to put my PCI hat on, so payment card industry, data security standard.
Yep.
Obviously, as we're a hype startup and we want to sell lots and lots, we're going to be processing credit cards. So we've probably got a very loving relationship going on with Stripe. So we are going to need some compliance in this. And clearly, PCI DSS has the best set of rules for securing your organization. Surely that's enough, Jesse. Surely we can just say we're PCI aware and compliant, and therefore we don't need to do much more.
How much engineering time do you think it'll take to get that PCI certification?
6. I'm not going to say what unit. No idea. But 6 of them. We're going to have 6 of them.
6 mythical man months.
Yeah, we're going to have some Pokedex going. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's the trick, right? So you've got these younger organizations, and this one is a really good example of where people get unstuck because they're like, well, actually, we're not regulated. We're we're not really in scope for PCI that much because we're using Stripe, because we're using these third-party integrations. And so therefore security becomes way down the list somewhere. There isn't necessarily that good driver, except for the one you mentioned, Jesse, of like you're competing with a lot of organizations, and one of the differentiators that's coming through is that awareness of security, data privacy, that kind of thing. But if we were in an alternate organization, let's kind of wipe the slate clean a second.
Yeah.
And we were, again, hype AI train, but this time very specifically, we are helping out doctors. So we are using AI to look at images from MRI scans to spot certain conditions. Not a doctor. So for anyone medical listening, none of that probably made any sense, but whatever. So we're helping in radiology sort of things. I feel for this one, it's a slightly different set of circumstances because we've got a different set of data in here, right? We've got medical records, which means we're now in a regulated industry. Would your approach change at all if you were in this new, more regulated space compared to our, B2B SaaS space?
Yeah. Well, certainly you can't throw compliance out the window if you're talking about, personal health information and things like that.
Yeah.
I would say in this case, I would very much tailor the security program to, what is truly our responsibility, because in that world, you're also any software or hardware, logistics, anything, any part of that chain is going to have very specific responsibilities.
Yeah.
And you want to be really clear about, okay, which things are our job and which things are we relying on our vendors to do properly. Right. And so there, I would both look at, okay, what is that slice that is really critical and what makes sense there? Where's the overlap between security and compliance? Because at that point, there's probably quite a lot.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to be doing the right things with encryption and things like that at the right stages. And then I would look really closely at the vendor security program. Who do we trust? Which slice of them are handling the most sensitive data, and really put the focus there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that springs to mind in this scenario for me is it's because I'm based in New Zealand, you're in the US right now. And when I think about regulation and companies like this, if you're doing this kind of thing, it's actually applicable globally. People have sickness and need doctors everywhere in the world. So like almost from the very beginning, you have to be very intentional of this is going to be a global thing versus this is going to be a local thing, because the regulation that you're going to face in different environments is going to be very, very different. And in some places they have shared root. So if you look at, NIST, like the SSDF underpins a whole bunch of the bigger standards. But then if you look on the privacy and data protection side, the US doesn't have as comprehensive a national level approach to privacy and data security.
That's right.
Whereas if you're selling into Europe, that's very different. India, Singapore all have very structured and very explicit data protection frameworks. And so thinking about not just the compliance as a driver, because you're going to need to meet it to actually be able to operate, but also linking that to your growth strategy and your go-to-market so that you don't accidentally, go to a trade show in Singapore one week just because it looked interesting and sell it to somebody and realize suddenly you've inherited twice the amount of compliance load. And to get that deal across the line, it's going to be absolutely essential. Yep. So it's the one time that I start to think compliance can be really useful, not so much to drive security, but to help you actually to craft and to filter your go-to-market a little bit. Because you can go, all right, look, we don't have the resource to tackle all of GDPR and the Singapore data protection regulations and COPPA, and we can't do it all at once. So we need to link where we go in terms of market and reach and sales to the compliance area and to what we engineer, because they're all intertwined. So it's probably a good mechanism for doing less, doing that, like that old cliche of choosing which thing you focus on and not trying to do all things, because it's one of those areas where trying to do all things in compliance is going to really hurt you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And part of what's really interesting about that way of talking about it to me is that the kind of failure state for compliance orientation, I think of as sort of the equivalent of teaching to the test, right? You just do the checklist because it's the checklist.
Yeah.
But as soon as you run into a situation like that, where you're balancing multiple regulations or choosing which ones to do, you're really forced into strategy in a way that I think is very helpful. You have to be doing things for reasons, right? And making really intentional choices of, okay, what do we get from this? Which ones can we solve with one solution, right? And if you're in that zone, really thinking about like just the why, what is the actual rationale? What is the strategy?
Yeah.
Then I think that's the more important thing to unlock versus is it compliance? Is it security?
Yeah.
For me, it's really about that intention and that understanding of what you get at the end.
I think what we might have done is turned what should have been a fight into a reason to work together, Jesse.
There we go. Does that mean we can still be friends?
I think it does. I think it means we get to
Excellent.
still be friends. Because I think what we're saying, I think what we as an industry really realizing is that each of these have their place. But if you are in a younger organization or in an organization that isn't a giant enterprise with massive security teams and GRC teams, then you have to find a balanced way through this that is respectful, that is meaningful to the business and not just the tech and the risk, but also its growth ambitions and its strategy. If you were to kind of round it all up, Jesse, and give one piece of advice, so imagine somebody finds this video and they're a younger organization, the type of company that you work with day in, day out, what's the piece of advice you would offer them?
Yeah. I would say, compliance and security can both sound really scary. I really believe that they don't have to be. If you approach it and say, okay, what matters for us as a company? What do we need to do? What's going to make sense? Talk to people who have experience with that, help sort out those trade-offs. But it's totally achievable to do the things that matter in a way that don't overburden your organization. And if someone's trying to sell you, oh, you've got to do these million things, or you need a 10-person security team before you can start thinking about this, I just don't think it's true. I think it's totally achievable.
Awesome. I like that. It's a very hopeful note for a security talk. We never get to do that. So amazing. Look, for those who would like to know more about Jesse, please do connect with him on LinkedIn. He is an incredible virtual CISO and works with fast-paced, smaller and growing organizations just like yours. So have a chat with him. For those who are just coming across me for the first time, we specialize in secure development education and making your AppSec program really easy to roll out. So if you want to bring a little bit more structure to how you build secure software, then check us out. But if you have enjoyed this and you would like to see more of them, please leave a comment, subscribe, follow, all of those kind of things. And if there's a subject you'd love us to go deep on another time, please do let us know. Thank you so much, Jesse, for joining me today. This has been fun. I've noticed that in the background, it looks like our pictures are trying to line up. It's like we've created some kind of strange modern art in the background. So we're winning on every possible level. They're getting there, almost there. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your energy. And I have no doubt we will do more of these in the future. So good luck with it all.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.